Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you all here. It's good to see you too, Zoomers. We'll start off like we usually do in Buddhist studies by chanting the refuges and precepts, and then we'll move right into our meditation. I'll guide that a little bit for us. The refuges and precepts are in the chat box if you need them. And I don't know what page they're on. 35 of the chant book. Thank you. We'll start off with Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. That's just acknowledging our teacher, the Buddha. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Buddham Saranam Gacchami. Dhammam Saranam Gacchami. Sangham Saranam Gacchami. Dutiyampi Buddham Saranam Gacchami. Dutiyampi Dhammam Saranam Gacchami. Dutiyampi Sangham Saranam Gacchami. Tatiyampi Buddham Saranam Gacchami. Tatiyampi Dhammam Saranam Gacchami. Tatiyampi Sangham Saranam Gacchami. Settling into the posture we've chosen. Inviting the body to relax and be restful. You can see if this is possible just by doing a little body scan, head to toe, just a couple of minutes. Noticing any places of tension. Inviting as much ease as possible. And once we've made it through the body, we can see what it's like to just receive the body, keeping the body in mind, realizing there's no reason to try to get away from the body. We just receive any experience. Without trying to get anywhere, without demanding anything. And what will happen naturally is we'll see both body and mind. They're so interconnected, body and mind. We might notice the relationship to experience, just one way of seeing the mind. We might notice various attitudes, there's nowhere we need to be except right here. Watching experience come and go. Exploring this dynamic relationship of body and mind. Not needing to hold on to anything, nothing's personal. It's just life expressing itself due to causes and conditions. Lawful. There's no reason to try to hold on to any experience or push anything away. And yet at times, this is what we'll notice. Wanting more, wanting something to happen, wanting more from our experience of meditating, or not wanting this. Two sides of the same coin. Wanting, not wanting. And we can remember that this is good news, to be noticing what often drives our lives. Trying to hold on, trying to get away. And yet here in a relatively protected space, relatively comfortable, we can learn how to be intimate with these natural forces of wanting and not wanting. And like anything else, we can watch them arise, watch them pass away. And sometimes they'll be so compelling, a fantasy will arise in the mind, and it will seduce us. Or a planning thought. And before we know it, we're swept away, carried away. And yet at some moment, the mind will realize this and we'll be able to learn something. Learn something about the force of delusion, the force of habit, the force of wanting or not wanting. And we can be in awe of it. Wow. No reason to condemn ourselves. See if we can have an attitude of wonder. And when in doubt, remember to relax. Remember that all this is just nature. And begin again. Let's continue in silence now. take a minute to stretch your legs if you'd like to do that. Even step away from your screen for a minute. If that feels useful. So it's good to be here with you all, and happy to be co-teaching this class with Mark. He is away right now at Cloud Mountain leading a metta retreat. So we'll all be the beneficiaries of him abiding in metta for a week once he gets back. He'll be full of love. Yeah, and so we'll be alternating these weeks. He'll be back next week, and I'll be here the following week, which I think you probably know from last week. And I enjoy talking about and practicing with the hindrances because they're so available. Yeah. I was talking to a friend about teaching this class, and they were like, "Oh, you know the hindrances." I was like, "You're right, I do." And so do you. This is the territory that we live in most of the time in our daily lives, right? And so it's really useful for us to begin to see the hindrances as ordinary and very common, so that we don't have this averse relationship to them. Right? Try to be good meditators and think, "Oh, there are the hindrance again." But no, the hindrances are just with us, and learning how to relate wisely to the hindrances is a way of, is a wise view. So when we accept the hindrances as nature, as ordinary, as impermanent, that's a way of orienting in the direction of wisdom, even with the hindrances. So it's to our benefit to get close and to get to know them. And this practice really comes back to the central inquiry of the Buddhas, which is, what is suffering? What is going on here? And is it possible to understand suffering so deeply that we no longer suffer? The suffering and the end of suffering, right? So in order to realize freedom, we have to know suffering. It's hard to know, it's hard to understand something that we don't know intimately, right? You probably would agree with that. So Buddha said that suffering should be understood. And so just a little bit about the hindrances in general. The hindrances can be found in the Satipatthana Sutta in the fourth foundation of mindfulness. And the Satipatthana is where the Buddha taught us how to practice. It's really an important reference. And in the four foundations of mindfulness, they go from gross to more subtle. So starting with the body, right? How to establish mindfulness. We establish mindfulness in the body. And then a little more subtle, we start to establish mindfulness by understanding feeling or feeling tone Vedana, the pleasantness, the unpleasantness that arises with each experience. And then we understand mindfulness of mind. We see how mind and body are connected, and we start to see even more subtle experiences, such as mind states, emotions, attitudes, beliefs, something like this. And then in the fourth foundation of mindfulness, it gets even more subtle, and the Buddha is really interested in the process of suffering and the end of suffering processes. right? And so in the fourth foundation, there are 3 ways that the Buddha describes the mind gets entangled. And it starts with the hindrances. The mind gets in one list, one way of describing how the mind gets entangled, right? And then, so the hindrances, the 5 aggregates of clinging, and the 6 sense spheres, which are all different aspects of this Buddhist studies course, but we're focusing on the hindrances for now. And then the Buddha talks about 2 ways, or 2 processes in which the mind gets disentangled. So the 7 factors of awakening and the 4 noble truths are here. Right? So if we look through any of these filters, such as the hindrances in this case, we're not just looking at hindrances, but remembering that all of these filters, so to speak, through all of them, we see everything. We see all of the teachings. Nothing arises in a vacuum, so to speak. Right? Even in the meditation, you might have noticed that you see wanting, sometimes we see not wanting, sometimes we see anatta, or the not self aspect of experience, that way of the wisdom orientation, where the mind goes like, oh, I don't have to take this personally. We see impermanence arising and passing away of experience. So we can remember that anytime we dig into any aspect of the teachings, all the other teachings come with it. Right? And we're looking through each of these different lenses in order to understand something: liberation, freedom, the end of suffering. So for the hindrances, the Pali word that usually gets translated as hindrance is like nirvana, something like that, which doesn't mean hindrance exactly. It's usually described as like meaning something that covers over. So a hindrance covers over clarity or wisdom. Hindrances dim the light of awareness, if you will. They're limiting. They limit our creativity. They limit our freedom. Right? There's an image in the scriptures of a large tree that covers over a small tree. This tree is small because it doesn't get nourished by the light. There's not enough light of awareness on our to illuminate what we're not seeing, right? So that we can see more clearly. Not enough light of awareness to illuminate wisdom. And a hindrance is actually a good word, because what it tells us is that there's been a momentary lapse of mindfulness. And we can see, even when we're really attuned, how hard it is to be mindful at every moment. It's really difficult, isn't it? Even in a 30-minute sitting period, we sit down, we're like, okay, I'm going to be mindful, I'm going to give it my all. And then, we realize we're thinking about giving it our all instead of actually being there with the body and breath. It's so simple. So moving on to sensual desire, which is the first of the hindrances, right? So sensual desire, the first, which is, we might describe it as the wanting mind. And then the second, aversion or ill will. Aversion is a bit more a general term, but we can use either of those words. The mind that doesn't want something or rejects something. And then we have these high energy and low energy states. So restlessness and worry, kind of an agitation, or high energy a little bit too much, or the sloth and torpor, which is the lower energy states, right? Dullness, apathy, sleepiness, any of this. And then the fifth one, which is kind of a hindrance storm, doubt. It kind of seems to bring with it all of the hindrances. So on these 6 weeks together, Mark and I will move through each of them. We'll start with desire. Today we'll move into a little bit into aversion. Mark will start with aversion next week and probably lean into, I think, sloth and torpor next. So sensual desire is wanting sensual pleasures or wanting things. I remember being on a retreat at Cloud Mountain, where Mark is right now, many years ago, and doing some walking practice and noticing that there was a bit of desire in moving, like every step, wanting to take the next step, wanting to keep practicing. And I was very curious about that, like, is there a bit of wanting? And does it feel stressful? Well, the answer was no, it didn't feel stressful, unless the mind got really tight on like wanting to be good at this or wanting to have a good walking period, then the mind started to feel tight. So we can remember that wanting or desire is human, right? Mark said that desire is the animating force of our lives. And so we're not supposed to get rid of all desires, but we can get close to them so that we can see, we can discern what's a skillful desire and what's an unskillful desire. So skillful desires like that desire to keep practicing, right? That would be a skillful desire. There's a different word for that in Pali, that's chanda. And we might think of that as like wanting to be free or wanting to be a decent human being. These are skillful desires. And so there are some desires that benefit our lives, like these desires, that don't come with that felt sense of clinging or tension, right? And then there are unskillful desires that don't benefit ourselves and each other. Sensual desire can sometimes feel really primal to me, like just really, really deep, like it's hard to not follow it through, right? But even though can be the case, we can start to see that earlier we start to see the movement of desire, then the easier it is to make this discernment, right? Is this skillful? Is this not skillful? Will following out this fantasy lead to anything good, right? For example, and if this were happening during a meditation, we might see, well, actually, even though this fantasy of having a good life, for example, might not be an unskillful desire, following it through in a meditation might not yield the benefits that we want it to yield, right? So the skillfulness of desires, really, we have to make that careful discernment in the moment. It's not immoral to have a sensual desire. It just makes it difficult for clarity to develop. And although it may seem that desire is pleasant, what I've noticed is that it's not pleasant all the way through, right? There might be a pleasantness to the beginning. I notice this again sometimes in moments when the mind is wanting something. It might feel like, though, that as a skillful thing to want, and yet the obsession of it or the staying connected with it isn't no longer skillful, right? So that we can feel into that unpleasantness that's there, even though it seems like this is a pleasant thing. We can feel into the unpleasantness, and that helps us learn how to let go, right? When we really take that in, when the body takes it in, when the heart takes it in, and we see, is this a skillful, is this actually pleasant anymore? And we might be surprised to see that it's not. And the Buddha said, that there are a couple of things we can do with skillful desire. We can get to know it, get to know what it's like to have desire, guide our lives, shape our minds, shape our activities. We can get to know the experience of desire and see that as different than the gratification of that desire. This is one mistake that we make as human beings. We think that, we miss the mind and we just see the gratification of that, right? We don't feel into the desire, but we place the attention on the cookie, right? We miss the mind, totally miss the mind. We do this with both desire and aversion. So we can get to know desire, linger in that, connect and linger with this wanting of this mind that wants, right? And we can get to know when there's no desire, because there are those moments when the mind is very content. We're just not wanting anything. And then we can feel what does that feel like? And we can know the difference. Like, what does it feel like to want? What does it feel like to be content? And then when we're confused about desire, we don't know if it's skillful or not, then we have a sense of what it feels like, right? We have a sense of what that's like. So ill will is the other side of the coin here, the other side of the coin from desire. This is not wanting, right? Last week Mark said that desire is an animating force in our lives. And I was just reading a section of the book Unhindered by Gil Fronsdal. Some of you might have read it. It's a great book. And in there, Gil said that desire and aversion are the caffeine of the soul. I thought, oh, that's a little bit similar, right? We depend on these forces to make life more exciting, right? We sometimes don't feel like we're alive unless we're getting pulled around. And so in some ways we're doing this radical move of learning how to see that and not be pulled around by it. And that feels so weird. So we'll get, it just feels different than what we're used to. Ill will, like sensual desire, is really diluted, right? Ill will can be preoccupied with the object, right? And miss that this experience of ill will or this experience of aversion is coloring the mind. So we fail to see how the mind is colored by sensual desire or aversion and how it's not really about the object at all. And the good news is that we don't have to just assume that that's true, but we can check it out. We can eat the cookie, right? We can stand in front of the refrigerator and hungry and just notice like wanting, and then eat something, and then eat something else, and see if that makes the wanting go away, or just what happens. Sometimes I notice that when there's a lot of wanting, and maybe I'm not even actually that hungry, there's just wanting, and I eat, then I want something else. Or something sweet, then I want something salty, then I want to watch TV, then I get bored with TV, and I want to get up and play with the dog, and I get bored with playing with the dog, so I'm going to go grab my phone to do something, and I get bored with doing that. Well, what I'm missing is that wanting is just driving the whole show, right? Or not wanting not wanting this boredom here. So two sides of the same coin there. So in mindfulness practice, we can learn how to choose where we place our attention. So do we place the attention on the gratification of desire, or do we place our attention on understanding the mind and how the mind shapes our actions and our thoughts and our intentions? There are so many flavors of aversion or ill will. Right? If we use the word aversion, we might see a fuller range. And just to name a few, boredom could be a kind of aversion. Hatred, of course. Irritation, annoyance. Shake your head if you've seen any of these in your minds. All right. Judgment, rage, anger, loathing, resistance, fear, panic, terror, loneliness, all aspects or expressions of the heart that doesn't want what it has, wants something more than this, right? Or doesn't want this. Right? Sometimes they feel very similar to me, sensual desire and aversion. It's like if we really get close to them, we see there's like a push-pull happening. I don't want this, right? Which is like wanting more of something else. And ill will comes with the instinct to lash out, motivated by some hostility. Aversion actually seems to grow into this, right? When we aren't good at being intimate with aversion, then aversion just grows, right? And then all of a sudden, it's like we have to make something stop, or we have to do something about it, right? I was actually just noticing, playing around with this in the meditation, and there was a little bit of, there's a little bit of anxiety, going to give a Dharma talk, and then the mind was really compelled by the meditation's almost over, here we go. The mind is really compelled by these thoughts, right? And just invested in following them through. The aversion seemed to lead to that wanting to think, not wanting to give the Dharma talk, even though I love you all. Make a little bit nervous sometimes, always, but that'll be the way it is for a while probably. But I love the Dharma, so here I am, right? But just that, and that compulsion to want to think those thoughts and then go, wait a minute, sweetie, you care more about watching the mind than you care about following that through. Right? For one, you followed that through plenty of times and it just goes in circles. But then with that understanding, wow, you care a little bit more. I know that, right? I know you care a little bit more about watching the mind than you do about gratifying this desire or getting away from something, an imagined reality of having to give a Dharma talk or something like this. Right, then the mind just learned how to back off. So that chatter just kind of moved to the background. It wasn't easy because the mind was still compelled to go back into it, but it could keep remembering, remember you care more about watching the mind than gratifying this, right? Than leaning into the object, the thoughts, in this case, the object. More interested in watching the process than in being in the thoughts themselves. And so sometimes, like I said, the hindrances cover over what's really here. Sometimes the hindrances cover over our own natural caring capacity, compassion, or patience. And sometimes what the hindrances are covering over is another kind of weed, we might say, right? So you might have noticed this when you get close to anger, and what you really notice is, wow, there's a lot of fear here, right? Or there's a lot of grief here. So sometimes that intimacy with the experience of aversion then shines the light on something that we didn't even notice was driving the whole thing, or a belief system that's driving it. I was on a retreat once at the Forest Refuge with very happy to be practicing with 2 teachers in the style of Sayadaw U Tejaniya. I was just really happy to have the month there. And at the FR, there's not a Dharma talk every day, but several days a week. And I was just really happy to hear from my teachers. And yet every time I went into the hall, sat down, ready for the Dharma talk, there was a subtle agitation that was there in the body and a lot of restlessness. And what I noticed, it took a while to go like, oh, something is going on here, right? Something repetitive, something conditioned. And at one point, watching the mind, I caught this thought, you could never do that. You could never do that, right? 2 of my just beautiful teachers, very wise, very happy, but just that subtle belief system is you're not good enough. You're not good enough, right? That drives the aversion and keeps it going forward. And it was actually good news to see because it's not specific to the object, right? Not specific to Carol Wilson or Andrea Fella, but just this perpetual pattern that exists in this heart. And it's not personal. I know that many of you have experienced the same or similar things, right? Of not feeling good enough. This is how it goes for human beings. But that belief, that subtle belief or a view that's really hard to notice can sometimes be illuminated when the heart can be intimate with these aversive states, right? With a lot of courage. So with practice, we can learn to be sensitive and to trust sensitivity more than anything else, because whatever we're seeing is really honest, right? So sincere. Even if it's another layer of wounding, it's sincere. And with every moment of noticing any of these aversive states, any of these aversive mind states, right, then it just makes them weaker. And it makes it possible to see them again, or at least to be curious about them. Like, I wonder if this is driving the show, right? I wonder if this is here. And we might then notice, like, oh, look at that. We get to air it out, which is part of the purification process. And we can also note that just like wanting, there's skillful wanting, right? It can be skillful desires. There can also be skillful not wanting, right? Like skillful or healthy averting, making a decision. So not wanting isn't a problem. Ill will or hatred that is born from hostility, when aversion is not observed, is the problem. But averting, making a decision, like in practice, to not feed something, right, is not the same thing. Right? So we might notice, for example, that there's an aversive state, like a lot of irritation, and then every time we do everything that we can, everything that we can think of, go to the body, notice sound, and yet that storyline just goes and goes and goes. And so one way of skillfully working with that aversion might be to direct the attention somewhere else. So avert the attention, right, from that activity. That's a skillful way of making effort. Noticing something is strong, a force in the mind is strong, and it's not, the force of mindfulness or awareness or sensitivity isn't as strong as that, and every time it kicks up in the mind, then we just fall for it, we take the bait, right? Well, one way is to notice that as early as we possibly can, and to direct the attention somewhere else, right? Or not now, sweetie, not now, not now. We might have to say that a lot of times. It's much easier to practice like this when we notice things early, right? Which is why sensitivity, mindfulness is our friend. Because the more we value sensitivity, the easier it's going to be to notice the arising of an unskillful mind state. It's much harder, it's not impossible, but we need to use a more gross strategy like directing the attention somewhere else when the train is already speeding down the tracks, right? It's harder to stop. I recognize that we need to wrap it up for small groups in just a couple of minutes. Let's see here. So one of the approaches to working with aversion or any of these aversive mind states is cultivating healthy mind habits like love, like patience. Sometimes wisdom can support the willingness of the mind to be patient, for example. Wisdom that goes like, oh, this isn't personal, this isn't my problem, this is just what happens to human beings, right? Aversion, anger. Sometimes Buddhists, we can have a view that we're awful Buddhist practitioners if we're angry, right? Because Buddhist practitioners, we look so peaceful sitting here with our eyes closed. And yet all of us know that it's not always that peaceful on the inside, right? And so it can be useful to remember that anger, irritation, any kind of activation is a normal human response. And that normal human response is a way of orienting to like, oh, this is just nature, right? This is what happens. Every mind has its own tendencies. We can get to know one of us might be lean towards more aversive states in the mind. Another one of us might lean towards greedy states in the mind or states of desire or wanting. But we all have all the same things. Right? We all experience desire, we all experience aversion. And so just accepting, this is human, and this gets to be my teacher for now, is a way of helping the mind just relax a little bit with it. Right? And when the mind can relax a little bit with it, then it becomes easier to access patience and love and kindness. Right? The mind can just go like, oh, yeah, this is just the way it goes for human beings. And really, as the years pass by, this is one of the deep fruits of practice, learning that I don't really have, my mind gets to be my mind. You know, if we want to use this language, my imperfections get to be my imperfections, and yet I learned just to not take them as seriously, realizing the roots of these, the unskillful mind states are going to be there, and every moment that they're noticed and we're sensitive to them and learn how to listen and care, then it weakens them. So we might not see the eradication of aversion or of wanting this day or this year even, but it doesn't mean that what we're doing is not helpful, right? Because it does help. When we can learn to catch these mind states early, then we can learn how to be more skillful human beings. So the practice is relational in this way. And it's easy to see, like when we're really practicing, when we're really watching our minds, and we notice frustration arise in the mind, and we care more about taking care of that than we do about gratifying it, it's a lot harder to say that dumb thing to the person we're talking to, right? Because we know this is going to hurt, and it's going to feel bad to me, and it's going to feel bad to them. So I'm going to see if I can do something to take care of this instead, right? Just like that. It's really, it helps us be relational human beings, even before we're fully awake. Right? Thank goodness for that. So I want to end by reading this lovely quote from Sylvia Boorstein. She says, mindfulness meditation doesn't change life. Life remains as fragile and unpredictable as ever. Meditation changes the heart's capacity to accept life as it is. It teaches the heart to be more accommodating, not by beating it into submission, but by making it clear that accommodation is a gratifying choice. Yeah? All right. Okay, thanks for your attention, everyone. It's good to be here.